Hey, this is Alan Gassman, and I am here with my friend Andy Cho, and we are going to talk about estate planning for Korean American families. And Andy is a very interesting and intelligent individual and has a very interesting story as well. He moved to the United States at age 15 in 1980, knowing very little English, and stayed in the United States, got a civil engineering degree from University of Texas Austin, which is not an easy degree program to get into, not an easy degree to get. Worked in South Korea for a time, became a lawyer. He's a member of the Texas bar and the California bar, which is another really remarkable achievement. And he's here today to enlighten American lawyers on what we need to begin to know about our clients with Korean roots and backgrounds, and to also speak to Korean families about what they may need to know and understand how the United States estate planning and related laws are different. So, Andy, welcome to this webinar, and thank you for your leadership, and congratulations on all of your achievements.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Gassman. Again, my name is Andy Hengsun Cho. I am an attorney and CPA practicing in Texas, and I would just want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Gassman for inviting me here. And also, I would like to thank everyone who have joined here. And I am very excited to share about South Korea and Korean American living in the United States. I myself came to United States when I was 14 and a half, 15 years old, and spoke little English. And I did get a lot of help from students and teachers while I was in school. And I went to college here in Texas, and I graduated from Santa Clara University in California. And I did work while I was working in San Angelo, Texas, helping Korean company who was manufacturing leathers. They had some environmental issues, so I went to help them, and at that time I decided to be having a desire to become an attorney. And with that in mind, I moved to Korea, and I worked there for a while, and I got married and had kids. Had a kid, and when I came back to States, I decided to go to law school. And I do practice a lot with the Korean Americans here in the United States, and also help the clients in Korea who want to move to United States. Let me first talk about South Korea, where it is located at. South Korea is located in Eastern Asia and share maritime borders with China and Japan. Its size is about 71.5% of Florida, where Mr. Gassman lives, and the population is about 51 million. Florida population is around 22 million, so it's about 2.3 times more populated than Florida. The actual size of South Korea is somewhat similar to Indiana. South Korea is highly developed, mixed economy, and has right now is 10th largest world economy. South Korean economy is again was the poorest country in the whole world in 1950s after experiencing harsh Japanese colonization and a devastating Korean War. And it had experienced rapid economic growth since Korean War have ended, and it is now one of the wealthiest country in the world, and again is the 10th largest world economy. South Korea is home to 15 of the world's 500 largest company by revenue, and these companies also conduct business in the United States. You may have heard companies like Samsung and LG. Those are consumer electronic companies, and Hyundai and Kia are the car manufacturing companies. On the left side of the slide, you see Seoul, South Korea. This is a capital of South Korea, the current one. And Korean culture is heavily influenced by the Confucian principles affecting personal lives and businesses and work life. Confucianism is ancient Chinese belief system that focuses on importance of personal ethics and morality. And Confucianism supports group harmony, respect for elders and authority, and the importance of family, friendship, ancestors, and traditions. On the left side of the slide, you see a traditional Korean style the buildings with background of modern buildings.
Andy, what percentage of American Koreans are significantly influenced by Confucianism?
The majority of Koreans are believed they are influenced by the Confucianism. Right now, these days, the young generations are being influenced by Americans and also Europeans, but mainly even 50s, 40s in ages, those are heavily influenced by Confucianism.
And there, I know that there's a large Catholicism community, but they're also influenced by Confucianism.
Yes, it's just a part of life. Even like they don't consider that as a religion, Confucian as a religion. It's just part of their living, what they grew up with. So they are heavily influenced by the Confucianism and respecting elders on authorities and importance of family and friendships they consider it very important.
Nice.
Okay. Korean Americans in the U.S. Other than Korea itself, the United States is home to largest Korean population globally, and according to Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Korea, in 2019, over 2.5 million Korean Americans live in the United States, and U.S. Census Bureau says 1.93 million in 2020. So it depends on where you look at the data. There is a difference, but there are a significant number of Korean Americans living in the United States. And now you might ask why there are so many Koreans living in the United States. And like any other immigrants in the U.S., starting from pilgrims moving from England to New World back in 1620s, seeking religious freedoms and fresh starts in a different land, Koreans immigrated to the U.S. to seek better educational opportunities and standard of living. Although a few students and politicians came to U.S. around 1884, after diplomatic relationship began between U.S. and Korea, the first significant wave of Koreans who immigrated to the United States began in 1903 with the labor immigration to Hawaii to work on pineapple and a sugar plantation. This is a little boring because it's a history, but I just wanted to let you know where the Korean Americans came from. The second wave of immigration was followed by marriage immigration after Korean War and immigration of adopted children and students coming to United States to study. Then in 1965, a third wave came when the immigration law changed and number of immigrants increased rapidly. And since then, Korean immigrants have gradually increased and have a substantial success, and their descendants are acclimated and blended into American society. And I believe most Korean Americans came during like 1980s through 2010. And I am among one of them who came in 1980 with my family. because my uncle and my aunts are already moved here to the States. These days, although the number of new Korean Americans have decreased somewhat, many Koreans are coming to the United States for education and business, and they are settling down in the States. As I have mentioned earlier, there are many international Korean, South Korean companies are doing business in the United States, prompting employees with their families to be dispatched to the US. And once they are here, they tend to stay due to children's education. South Korea is a very competitive society, and competition over admission into top colleges and landing a good job is fierce. So most parents do not want their children to go through that harsh education environment in South Korea, so they tend to stay. At least children are staying behind with one parent. The picture shown on the right, left side is a Korean American parade near downtown LA. The parade participants are wearing Korean traditional military costumes. Okay, and the Korean American population in the US, the most Korean American live in the metropolitan area of California, New York, New Jersey, and Washington, and Texas, Illinois. You see on the chart on the right that shows California is the most populous state for Korean Americans with 29%, and then New York and Texas. And Texas has been growing quite a bit. Recently also that the Texas Samsung has decided to open an office in Austin, manufacturing company in Austin. I expect more people to move to Texas. Family values. Korean tradition again are established under Confucianism, and that includes father's authority and wife's obedience to husband. And this is old stuff, but still in Korea, people are following by these rules or customs. Children's obedience to their parents and caring for parents and elderly family members, and submissiveness to public authority, and high expectation for education and establishing harmony.
Andy, are you seeing the divorce rate increase?
Yes, quite a bit actually. It was not used to be like that, but influenced by American cultures and European cultures, there are quite a bit more divorces. The people they divorce because of difference in personalities. Very westernized, especially for younger generations.
Are most of the marriages arranged in South Korea, and are the traditional South Koreans arranging marriages, or are people picking their own spouses?
Nowadays, people are picking their own spouses, but there are traditional families where marriages are arranged, but it is not often as before. So I think more people are dating, and also through like their schools. When they attend school, they meet the opposite sex and date and get married. And for personal experience, I think if it's arranged marriage, are maybe because of parents are involved, they tend to stay longer, I think.
Your parents can pick for you better than you can when you're 25.
Yeah. The picture on the left side, you see a folk drawing of old Korean class. It looks like that student in the middle and center was punished by a teacher. It looks like he's crying. Okay, Korean communication patterns. Koreans are generally indirect and wordy. Most Koreans are into saving face and being polite, which means that they seldom say a firm no and give negative response, even though they disagree with you. So you need to pay close attention to speaker's posture, face expressions, and tone of voice to elicit what they really mean. Probably best way to know what they mean is check their explanation again multiple times, uh, giving open-ended questions like, what is that? What you really mean? I think that's one way to communicate with the Korean Americans here.
Do they change their mind, or in other words, instead of saying, "Well, no, Andy, I don't want to retain you because that's too expensive," they'll say, "We need to think about that, and we'll get back with you"?
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, yes, they would say letter and say, "We need to think about it. Let me think about it again, and let me talk to my spouse and decide." They do not give direct answers. Okay. The Koreans are relationship-oriented. Third-party referrals are often very effective in building trust. Once mutual trust is built, Koreans work hard to ensure that the success of their business partners and continue to work hard to build their trust and loyalty they need to support their future business. Most Koreans often want to know a lot about their business partners. They may want to ask about like personal details and ask questions about unrelated and irrelevant point at hand, but sometimes very nosy. They may ask you whether you are married and how many siblings you have, whether you have any kids, and whether they go to school. But they don't mean any harm. Still, just for the business relationship, they want to know, and you got to be patient and provide the answer if you can to build trust. Also, the business relationships are linked to personal life. Koreans appreciate developing relationship through meals or drinks, and they consider business partners as friends.
You say the typical alcohol consumption for the
Yeah,
Korean business person
pretty
is
high. They like to drink. Also drink over meetings and meals. So that's pretty typical in Korea.
good to know.
Okay. Korean religious belief. Majority of Korean American population identify themselves as some form of Christians, but some are Buddhist and some have no religion. Korean Americans often maintain their kinship ties and Korean friends and affiliation with the Korean churches. And Korean churches are major source for social network interactions, maintaining their traditions through language and food they share. There is a joke about Korean churches. When Chinese move to a new town, they open Chinese restaurants, and when Koreans move to a new town, they open a church. Interaction with the family members living in Korea. Due to cheap communication costs and frequent flights between US and South Korea, made the interaction with the family members living in Korea much more connected than ever. And families in the US can talk to families in Korea for free due to advancement of communication technologies. And there's a free internet chat, free chat texting, and Zoom and Google Meet, and so on. My wife's family is in Korea, and they do calling almost every day. Talk about daily lives and about kids, how they are doing. So this has been very close network interaction between families due to these technologies. And Again, since there is an increasing number of direct flights between South Korea and various cities in United States, family frequently visit each other. Okay. Next, patterns about savings by Koreans. Having gone through a harsh time during Korean War and also financial crisis in 1997, the South Koreans tend to be very frugal and save their household income.
Do they typically save it in cash versus how Americans put it in the stock market, or are there tendencies with respect to that?
Some people save in cash. Also, more in Korea, they save a lot in cash. But also these days, they use bank to save, and also they do investments in stock markets, especially in America. People are saving, and they are concerned about retirement too. So they do savings through the stock markets and savings and bonds.
Is there much confidence in real estate, or about the same as a typical American view?
Once they accumulate assets, they like to buy commercial properties, at least small shopping center strips. What they do is they usually own a small business anyways, so they would build a building and they conduct their business and also rent the rest of their buildings. And as they accumulate more, they tend to buy shopping centers here in the United States.
Are there certain businesses that they typically gravitate towards?
You know, there's old saying like when you land on America, depends on who you are picked up. The person's the business changes, or you know, the business depends on the person who picks up the arriving person. And the small businesses here in Texas, I think a lot of people do donut shops, and there are like janitorial services and like nail shops, and all different kind of small businesses. And of course, there are big companies in Korea, international companies that hire Korean Americans also work in those kind of fields, high tech fields. Okay. Again, the first generation of Korean Americans are small to mid-sized businesses. They are of retirement age, and they are concerned about how they can transfer the saved retirements and transfer their accumulated assets to kids right at this time. As you know, as I have said, Korea is 10th largest economy in the world, and their real estate value significantly increased, and individuals have accumulated assets. And Korean Americans beneficiaries are inheriting assets from families in South Korea. Some are substantial in value. I have clients coming in asking to do the power of attorneys and some other required documents so that the transition can occur to bring the assets from Korea to United States. And also, since kids who study in the United States most likely settle in the U.S., and also people moving to Korea to United States and for businesses, they tend to move. They tend to stay in the United States. So parents who are living in Korea also move to United States, bringing their assets. Okay, I want to talk about a little bit about Korea inheritance law. There are some similarities and also differences here. When decedents leave will, the will has priority over intestacy statute, respecting the decedent's desire. This is similar to U.S. law, but the second one, will does not have to go probated if the beneficiary agrees on distribution. This is something different. If they can agree, they don't have to go to court to probate the will. And also, the will cannot completely disinherit a living beneficiary. So even if the will says that a person cannot inherit from the when I die, the beneficiary, living beneficiary, can still get at least a half of what their entitlement is. If beneficiary disagree, then they can go to court, and the court can decide how to divide the inherited property. The building on the left shows the South Korea's court, one of the South Korea's court building. Okay. South Korea's intestacy law, upon deceased death, estate's ownership is automatically transferred to the heirs if there is no will. So no probate proceedings required here neither. If they have a disagreement or conflict, then a lawsuit can be filed. The logo see on your left is Korean, South Korean court logo, and characters on the top, it says Court of Republic of Korea.
So Andy, I guess I Googled Korean law firm.
Yes.
To find an American law firm that specialized in Korean work, and instead I found a lot of South Korean law firms, and their websites look just like American law firms. Mm-hmm. It seemed to be very similar. I guess since there's no probate, if everyone agrees, the revocable trust is not as popular there?
Yeah, yes. The trusts are not popular in Korea.
Are they permitted in Korea? If I have a client whose parents live in Korea, can they leave the assets in trust as opposed to outright?
I believe trust is acceptable, allowed, but there are not many trust used in Korea right now.
And then in a typical situation, a wealthy family, would a husband die and leave everything to his wife? Or I think I read somewhere that sometimes the oldest son inherits and then has a moral obligation.
If husband leaves asset and he dies, I will explain that to you later. Usually wives is entitled to 1.5 units, and son and daughter get 1 unit each. It's old law that the oldest child gets, the son gets the total entitlement. It's no longer a law right now.
The parents normally move in with the oldest son when they need help?
Yes. Oldest son, these days, if the oldest son is not willing, then the other children take care of their parents.
And is there an estate tax or any sort of tax on leaving assets at death in South Korea?
I believe there is estate tax for leaving estates to the family members, to heirs. Yes. Okay. Intestacy law, as an example, this is order of inheritance when the spouse of the decedent does not exist or die. I think this is pretty similar to our law here in the United States. So by ranking, the decedent's linear descendants. For example, son and daughter would take if the spouse does not exist. The second would be the linear ascendants, father and mother, and third would be brother and sister. So this is very similar to our law here when a person dies without a will. The second example is order of inheritance when the spouse of the decedent does exist with, let's say, one son and daughter, and then the ranking of inheritance is both spouse and also decedents, linear descendants. Example, the spouse get 1.5 units, and son or daughter, any living children will get one unit. And the second ranking would be both spouse and descendants, linear ascendant, one spouse 1.5, and father 1, mother 1 unit. Okay. South Korea's inheritance by representation. When descendants, son, so the son or daughter predeceases decedent, let's say father, then descendants' children still have the right to inherit the descendants' portion of the decedent's assets. For example, a father has 2 children, John and Mary, and John predeceases his father, survived by John's son David. Mary will inherit her portion, and David will inherit John's portion. Inheritance shares. Here, the calculation of beneficiary share will be disproportionate by law. If one of heirs has received a significant gift from deceased, or one family member has supported deceased or financially or physically during their lifetime. I remember when we were students, when I was student in law school, we get support from my wife's father in Korea, and my wife told me that whenever money is given, gift is given, he would write something down on the note and saying a certain amount was given to my wife, and I didn't understand why. After studying this, I realized why he has been doing that. I realized that the significantly less amount will come to us when he passes away. If there's no agreement reached, then a lawsuit can be filed. Okay. Oops. I ended the slide here. Also, I haven't seen this in the U.S. law, but death inheritance law. This is something very different than United States. Under Korean law, the deaths are also inherited by beneficiary equally. So if that is more than the asset value, the renunciation or disclaimer must be filed within 3 months from the date when their heirs know about a person's death. There was one case that personally know of who came to me because the person was living in United States, and the father passed away in Korea, and father died with a lot of debt, and this child living in the United States did not know about it and did not renounce the debt. So debt collector hired by Korean company actually wrote a letter demanded the money that her father owned to her. So this is an actual case. This is something that Korean Americans usually don't know about. So maybe y'all can warn Korean Americans if you have any clients. That's all I have.
Andy, for clients who have income producing assets or properties in South Korea, they can set up a limited liability company in South Korea to limit liability, and then they can inherit or gift the ownership of the limited liability company there?
That is possible, yes.
Burial and funerals. What are the typical rules that would be followed by a Korean family on what happens after death?
Depends on what kind of religion the persons have. Christians follow their Christian burial services, and there are also Buddhists have uh, Buddhist the tradition of how the funeral is conducted. So it all depends on what kind of religion that they have. Usually, um, if it is followed through Confucianism, they have a services and buried on the cemetery, and also they follow like 40-day rules where a person needs to mourn for 40 days, wearing this funeral custom, and this has been followed by some, and it all right now and these days, because a lot of Christianities have moved in, and it has changed in somewhat, but um, it all varies right now.
So you have a fairly large South Korean or native Korean practice. Does most of your work come from word of mouth, or they find you on Google and they discover that you speak Korean? Or how do you think, how do you market for
My
them, and how do you
practice
get them good information?
usually comes from word of mouth. I do advertisement. There is a Korean American newspapers and internet services providers here in Texas. I don't usually advertise them through there. I advertise in the newspaper. I get a lot of calls, but you tend to get more clients through word of mouth. And my majority of my clients are through word of mouth.
Okay. How is the experience different for you as the estate planner when you do an estate plan for a typical Korean family versus a typical American family? What are the biggest differences in your experience? The amount of time that you spend, the amount of explanation that you give, the assets, the closeness of the family, what are the differences?
Having Korean American Korean clients, have to do more explanation about American law. Now, I think the estate planning for Korean Americans are evolving. Usually, they did not even have, they didn't, most of Korean Americans did not have estate planning at all. And um, I have been trying to get into estate planning for 15 years, but I did a basic estate planning because they did not want to go through the complicated ones because they didn't understand. But through education by financial advisors um, and also attorneys, I think they are more uh, they want it more nowadays.
Is there more or less of an inclination towards life insurance?
Yes, because there is a heavy marketing by financial advisors, especially life insurance marketeers. They do tend to do a lot of life insurances. There is a big a lot of agents through New York Life, and also there are two other Korean American financial advisor communities that handle a lot of life insurance policies
then,
throughout the United States.
yeah. And then do you have children, Andy?
I do have children.
How old are they?
I have one daughter and one son. Daughter has graduated from college. She is in Korea right now, and son is in junior studying.
So if you sit down with your children and assuming that they would actually listen to you, what would you tell
Yes.
them? What would you tell them is the best thing and the careful thing to do as an American, and the best thing and the careful thing to do as a Korean, and how that all comes together? What's your what's your father guidance to them?
I haven't I haven't actually thought about it that way, but as I think living as a Korean American still is different than living as a as an American or as Korean. I believe that as being a Korean American, you just have your own identity. Part of you, part of you is American, and part of you is Korean. So whatever where they whatever they do, they just need to do try their best and things that they do. That's about. I never thought about the question that you asked.
Well, I mean, some immigrant families say, I'm afraid to send my children to college because there's so much bad influence at colleges, or I don't want to send my kid to high school because I don't want them to learn all those, nasty things that American kids do. But
Well, I didn't think about that way at all. Just a part of life that they have to experience, and they need to determine their own. Even though I practice law, my daughter went to art school, and it's very liberal compared to what I have learned. And my son went to major in music. So another thing that I would not, if I had to make a decision, I would not have let them do that. But that's what they wanted to do, so I let them do what they like to do.
they're going to pick their own spouses too.
Yes.
Okay, so Andy, I've got a couple questions here from the audience. Are there any Korean inheritance laws that would override a U.S. law? I can't think of any.
My understanding is if asset is located in the United States, you need to follow by U.S. law. If assets are located in Korea, then it needs to follow Korean law.
And if you do a U.S. will, would you also do a Korean will to cover the Korean assets?
I would do that. I have clients who have some assets in United States and also assets in Korea. If you write a will in U.S. only, you probably have to take that will and actually maybe probate it in Korea. So I encourage my clients to write a separate will for Korean assets in Korea.
And then the last question is there a tendency for Korean families to aggregate their monies? So it's not only in the mother and father's name, but it's also in the children's names and the uncle and aunt's names as an aggregate, as opposed to the way in the United States, everybody typically has their own separate money.
Well, spouses, they aggregate their money together typically, but for siblings, uncles, and those distant relatives or even children's, I don't believe they aggregate their money.
Very good. Well, if anyone has any questions or suggestions, you can email Andy. Andy, what's your email address?
My email address is andy.wcexplaw@txepcenter.com.
Or what I do is I just type in, I Google Andy Cho, Texas, lawyer, and it comes right up. And Andy, thank you so much for the advice you've given us for Texas and California clients. You know your community property laws, that's for sure, and you know your disposition laws of both Texas and California, which I think is just a remarkable achievement. So thanks again. Anyone viewing this, if you have any ideas for new presentations on any sort of cultural or nationality or diversity type of opportunity, Marty Shinkman and I are putting all these together and making them available on our websites and also for the National Association of Estate Planning Councils. So Andy is only one of so many great many that we're thankful to have in our community. So thanks again, Andy, and may the rest of your day be billable.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.